Hi, Kevin Wright here, back with another property finance tip, my weekly tip. And what are we going to be talking about this week? It's another auction video, but what angle of auctions are we looking at this week? Well, the difference between, well, on one hand, the traditional old style auctions, and on the other hand, these modern auctions. So are they the same? No. I'm going to share 5 key differences between these two business models. So it's important that you understand which one you're dealing with. So if that sounds interesting, stick around. So auctions, well, I've done a few videos on auctions, so check out some of these other ones. You might see the dotted around the page, you've got some of the thumbnails from those previous videos. So check them out after you watch this one. So this week we're going to focus on the difference between these newer modern auctions, as they're termed, and the older, more traditional auctions. So let's start off with a modern auction. Now these modern auctions have sprung up, only in the last few years, and certainly, in the last decade. Before then, there were only traditional auctions. So what's different about a modern auction? Well, one of the big differences is they work in partnership with estate agents, whereas the majority of traditional auctions are standalone businesses. Okay, some have got an estate agency as well, but predominantly they're standalone businesses. And hey, there's somewhere about 350 traditional auctioneers operating in the UK. So how does that difference play out? Well, the modern auctioneers go to an estate agent and say, hey, would you like us to sell some of your properties for you? I don't know, maybe the ones you're struggling to get rid of a bit. Now on the traditional auction side, they operate independently and they attract auction sellers directly. There's no estate agent involvement in many cases, and the auction house runs on a separate basis, so they put out a catalogue. So there's your first difference. Modern auctions work in association with estate agents. Traditional auctions are pretty much standalone businesses. Now, secondly, we're going to move on to the bidding process, because this is dramatically different. Now, maybe you're familiar with traditional auction bidding process. Most people are, but I'll just run over it, just in case. So, traditional auctions are held on a specific day in a specific location, although, of course, with COVID, most of them are held online now, and they may get back to, an actual auction room and have in-person auctions at some point. But all the action takes place on a single day. You'd have a number of lots, and it could be 10 lots on these smaller regional auctions, 50, 100, 200 on some of the big London auctions. And the auctioneer rattles through them at a speed of knots. So, each lot typically runs for a couple of minutes while bidding is active. And if the reserve price has been met, the property is sold on the day, and bang comes the gavel. You've probably seen it, even if you haven't been to an auction, you've seen auctions on television. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, bang, there we are, sold to that man there, or woman there, of course. So that's a traditional auction. Most people have seen it. If you've ever watched an episode of Homes Under the Hammer, and who hasn't done that? I mean, they've been around for 20 years, haven't they, pretty much? And they're on daily reruns. Particularly in pandemic, and I think half the nation, even if they never watched it before, watched it, particularly during lockdown 1, when we had nothing to do but sleep and hang around the house. So you're probably familiar with how a traditional auction works. Now, a modern auction is substantially different, and let's look at that. Now, it's fair to say that the modern auctioneers didn't invent their method of bidding at auction. They copied it. And where did they copy it from? eBay. So if you've ever taken part in an auction on eBay, you'll understand and be familiar with the way that the modern auctioneers work. So unlike a traditional auction where the action happens on one day, with a modern auction, it's protracted over a number of days and often over a number of weeks. So a property remains for sale with a closing date, and it gets a bit of bidding activity, sometimes more than others, but all the central activity but the majority of the bidding activity is in the hour before the bidding expires. That's when you'll get bid after bid after bid after bid after bid, and ratcheting it up. So properties hang around for weeks with little or no interest, or maybe a bit more interest, and then you get frenzied bidding as it comes up to the bidding deadline, and whoever has the winning bid proceeds. So that's the second difference. Traditional auctions, it all happens on a day. Modern auctions, it's spread over a number of weeks sometimes. Now let's look at the third area, what happens to the winning bid. Now a traditional auction, you know, the one that you might only have 2 or 3 minutes to bid for your lot, and when the hammer goes down, when the gavel goes down, you're deemed to have exchanged contracts there and then. So you're in a binding contract that you cannot get out of without penalty. Is that the same with the modern auctions? No, it's not. You've had the winning bid, but it's not a binding bid in the same way, because the modern auction gives you 28 days after the winning bid to exchange contracts. Now, the modern auction is not without a cost if you pull out. I'll explain that in one of the other differences to follow this one. So we've got the third difference there, that what happens to the winning bid. In the traditional auction, as soon as the gavel goes down, you're deemed to have exchanged contracts, and that's binding. With the modern auction, you've still got another 28 days before you exchange contracts. Now let's look at the fourth point, and this is actually not a difference, they work the same on this, and that's the time you get to complete after you've exchanged contracts. So on a traditional auction, fall of the gavel, you've exchanged contracts, you get 28 days to complete. Now there are some variations. I've seen some auctions that only give you 14 days, and I've seen some that give you 42 days, but the overwhelming standard is 28 days to complete. Now, I do see some auctions class that as 20 days, but what they mean is 20 working days. Now in 20 working days, you've got 4 weekends of 2 days. So 20 working days plus the weekends is still 28 days. So it's just the same thing expressed differently. Now modern auctions, even though they give you a whole 28 days to get round to exchanging, they still only give you the same 28 days to complete. So there's more similarity there with the modern and with the traditional. Now here's one big difference with the way that modern auctioneers operate if you're buying at auction compared to a traditional, and that is the auction buyer's fee. Now modern auction will charge you a buyer's fee. It's usually a minimum of £5,000 plus VAT, which is £6,000, or a percentage of the sale price if higher. And if you have the winning bid, you incur that cost. Now this is different because in a traditional auction, there is no charge to the buyer from the auctioneer. Now the seller may include some costs that the buyer has to pick up, but that's contained in the legal pack, but it's the seller imposing those costs and not the auctioneer. So traditional auctioneers, it's the seller that pays. The seller pays a fee to list their property in the auctioneer's catalogue, and the seller pays a percentage of the sale price, much like an estate agent really, on the sale of the property. And again, the seller may actually, within the legal pack, defer that auctioneer's cost and make the buyer pick it up. Now, if you don't know how a modern auction works and you're not prepared for this 5,000 plus VAT minimum buyer fee, you could eat into a chunk of your profit because you're expecting to pay, let's say, 125,000 when you actually find out there's another 6,000 on top of that. Now, if you'd have known that, you'd have structured your bid down to allow that £5,000 plus VAT. So summing up that difference, modern auctions have a buyer premium that has to be paid, but traditional auctions do not. So with this video, I'm just focusing on the different ways that modern auctions and traditional auctions work, but there's lots of other stuff to be careful about when you're bidding at auction if you want to keep safe. Check out those other videos. You remember the ones I showed the thumbnails for earlier. So go check them out on the website, and I'll be back next week with another property finance tip. See you then.
If you enjoyed watching this video, did you know every Monday morning at 8:30, I do a live Facebook Q&A. So if you want to start the week with checking out some answers to your property finance questions, click the link here.